I think it will get a bloody nose. I think it will lose support.
The fight over who runs the town halls of South Africa, the question over where the money and taxes of the people will be spent, how some of the biggest cities in Africa will try to stave off decline and ruin. It's a battle for the votes of millions that has drawn more passion than anyone ever thought. Now, normally the municipal elections in South Africa are a big yawn. 61,000 candidates trying to be elected to run the country's cities. So what? But this year it's different. The precarious political situation around the ruling African National Congress has made this election box office material. There are three main actors in this movie. President Jacob Zuma is the leading role. He heads the African National Congress. As the economy has struggled and investment dried up, there have been questions about his leadership. Then the new kid on the block, Mmusi Maimane, young, eloquent, ambitious and black. He has to try to convince the majority that the Democratic Alliance is not a white party of privilege. Then the bulldog on the block, Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the former ANC Youth League firebrand with a party just as youthful. It gained 1 million votes in its first election in 2014, just months after it was formed. In the last days before the election, the EFF was out canvassing door-to-door in Imizamo Yetu in Hout Bay near Cape Town. This is a fishing community that the EFF sees as a place to catch votes. Leading this team of activists is Cosmas Mabona, the chairman of the EFF group on Cape Metro Municipality.
But the ordinary South Africans, the mood is there. The mood is there. They want us. When we arrive in other houses, they say, "Where were you? We don't see EFF." And that is what we're getting up, because we've been doing this since every day. I think it's now for 3 weeks we've been establishing these ground forces.
This is the kind of poverty and frustration that the EFF hopes to tackle in winning over the people. This woman says her house flooded in a storm and her granddaughter ended up sleeping in a plastic bucket. Her shack has burned down 6 times, she says. A lot of the people live 5 and 6 to a shack. They say they're frustrated by neglect of the authorities. All of this a stone's throw from luxury in Hout Bay, one of the big issues in this election.
If you are in Hout Bay, if you just look at the back of you, there's a 1.3 million house, and you can just look here. It's, the poverty, you don't need to read it over newspapers, you can see this. So it's for them, if they vote, is going to change their own life.
Protea South in Soweto, Magdalene Church. It is here that the DA is navigating gravel roads to uncharted political territory. It is in places like this that the DA hopes to dance to victory. There is a belief in political circles that he who takes Soweto can take Johannesburg. Mmusi Maimane fits the suit and also the surroundings.
The DA is the only party that has grown consistently since 1999. It has also grown amongst black voters. It has grown its black membership base, albeit from a narrow base. And it is interesting to look at the DA today and compare it, let's say, to the DA in 1999 or even 2004. The difference between the DA now and the DA then is that the DA today looks more like a liberation movement than was the case in 1999. What Helen Zille, the former leader of the party, did was to take the fight to the crawl of the ANC by insisting that the DA was part of the anti-apartheid struggle. And therefore, the struggle heritage of this country is also the struggle heritage of the DA.
His publicists often point out that the DA is no longer the white party of privilege and that its leader, Maimane, was born and bred right here in Soweto.
Our critical focus here is to build infrastructure. As you can recall, the clinic here doesn't even have electricity most of the time. Many people here still don't have toilets. And what we're saying is that let's build the infrastructure around Protea South. Put proper road infrastructure, put the appropriate electricity connections. Our people here cannot be called izinyoka or criminals for just asking for electricity. Our people want to pay, but they can't even get electricity connected to them.
In its campaign to win over the majority, the DA has wheeled out self-made millionaire Herman Mashaba as candidate for Mayor of Johannesburg. The son of a domestic worker who made millions from hair care products hauled himself up from the bottom rung. He calls himself the capitalist crusader.
And you're giving us the privilege to be public officials. Firstly, the number one problem and challenge people facing here is high unemployment. So we need to get Johannesburg to be that city. That city can provide opportunities to our people. And for me, I believe the only way we can drive to bring down unemployment in our city is to drive it through small business development, because the ANC government has dismally failed the last 15 odd years or so in ensuring that we can use small businesses to be the ones actually driving our economy and giving our people employment opportunities.
Then there is the party of the masses that runs most of the town halls across the country. The African National Congress is the oldest and best-known liberation movement across Africa and wants to stay that way. It may have struggled against criticism that it is losing touch with the people and the economy, but it still garners support. There was talk before this manifesto launch in June in Johannesburg that the party wouldn't fill FNB Stadium. It didn't, but still drew 85,000 people. On this day, there was also a sign of how the party can stand together when threatened. Divisions within the party threw the president's address into doubt, but it was solved and he spoke.
If you remember, in the 2014 election campaign, the ANC, particularly its leader, Jacob Zuma, was very dismissive about the black middle class in particular, and the middle class in general. And to me, this was a mistake on their part. And it explains why many who are black and middle class abandoned the ANC in 2014, because no ruling party anywhere in the world can afford to alienate the middle class, because you need the middle class for economic development.
Overall, the ANC wants to be the party of business.
Our main responsibility is to create an environment where the private sector can thrive, can be able to do business. So we are busy at the moment looking at the issues of bureaucracy, cutting red tape, to ensure that we are friendly to investments. And there are companies that are already showing that. I mean, BMW is investing heavily in Tshwane, the automotive sector there. Ford company is investing there. So there are a lot of companies that are coming in. We want to ensure that those numbers must grow to ensure that we can tackle the high levels of unemployment.
Its incumbent Mayor of Johannesburg, Parks Tau, says he believes in the entrepreneur.
We need to build a cadre of entrepreneurs. But how do you build a cadre of entrepreneurs? You provide entrepreneurial support. We've already started with 24,000 entrepreneurs that we've supported. But now we would want to create the facilities for them to be able to trade.
The ANC faces an uphill battle. It fared well in municipal elections in 2006 when it gained a near two-thirds majority, while the DA lost ground. But in 2011, the DA increased its share at the expense of the ANC. The ruling party still held the entire country bar Cape Town. This year, it's likely to struggle.
Should the ANC suffer serious losses in this election? And the answer is yes, they should. If you look at the gap between its ideals and what it has become, and you look at its delivery record, and you look at the levels of antipathy towards the party and its president, the ANC should lose massively in this election. But the second question is, will it? And in my view, is that what voters will do will not conform to our predictions. In other words, the ANC will suffer erosions in electoral support, but they will not be as deep as we are predicting.
These are the danger spots for the ANC in order of risk. Nelson Mandela Bay in Port Elizabeth, Tshwane, that is Pretoria, and the city of Johannesburg.
It is highly unlikely that the ANC will retain Nelson Mandela Bay. But it is also highly unlikely that any party is going to win an absolute majority in Nelson Mandela Bay. So what I think will happen in Nelson Mandela Bay is that a coalition government will come into being, most possibly to the exclusion of the ANC, which will be sitting in the opposition benches. When it comes to Tshwane, remember that in 2011, the ANC won about 55% of the vote, and the DA about 38%. And there was no economic freedom fighters. Now you have the economic freedom fighters who are going to take votes not from the Democratic Alliance, but from the ANC. And what I foresee is a situation where the ANC will either lose Tshwane, or the best it will achieve is winning a relative majority compared to the other parties. In which case, the question that will arise is whether the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the DA will gang up against the ANC to form a coalition government in Tshwane. On the other hand, given the fact that globally, voters seem unwilling to comply with the predictions of us commentators, I am not ruling out the possibility of the ANC retaining Tshwane. But if it does, I don't see them getting close to the 55% of 2011. I think what they'll achieve will be something just over 50%. Johannesburg, I still think Johannesburg is a bridge too far for the Democratic Alliance.
In the second half, the business story. What are the entrepreneurs worried about?
Corruption.
What does business want to see from its civic leaders?
Clean up the litter. Take the litter off the streets. Keep the city clean. Make everybody proud to be part of Johannesburg.
Stay tuned for the views of South Africa's 2016 municipal elections, from the boardroom to the factory floor. It's being called one of the closest and most intriguing political fights at the ballot box in the history of African elections. In the South African municipal elections, the African National Congress, Democratic Alliance and Economic Freedom Fighters have spent millions in their fight to run the country's cities, spending in tough economic times.
One of the big issues in this election is the economy. When you come to places like Sandton and see buildings going up and cranes over the skies, you can be fooled into thinking that South Africa has a thriving economy. Think again. The economy is flatlining at a time when it needs to grow at least 5% to absorb the number of job seekers looking for employment. On top of that, life in this country for entrepreneurs is getting tougher and tougher.
Just asked a few questions on the gritty factory floors where South Africa's wealth is churned out.
So this is Roper Street in New Centre, just south of Johannesburg. And there are scores of companies here, tiny little companies, making things, creating wealth and jobs. Now I'm here to see one of them, to see what they want from the politicians in this election.
This is Purple Infinity, founded in 2009, a small company that makes uniforms for hotels. It earns dollars by exporting to Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia and Zanzibar. Around 40 workers turn out up to 5,000 uniforms a week that end up in hotel kitchens and lobbies. It buys 10 kilometres of cloth every month. Nearly all of it is bought from South African textile mills, supporting even more jobs in the country.
This is where we do our cuttings. The work that you see there from the sewing machines, it gets from through here. She's the cutter. The patterns that I've shown you, they got printed in a paper like this. And she lay everything on top of the fabric, and then she's doing the cutting.
Siyabonga Ndwalaza, a designer by trade, is a partner here and says these are tough times. The idle sewing machines tell the story. Just 2 years ago, there were 3 times as many workers here. Cheap Chinese imports and corporate cutbacks have taken their toll.
We are flooded. Let me put it in that way. Everything gets flooded. You look at the chicken that get flooded from Brazil here, the clothing manufacturers I mentioned from China. So I'm looking for someone who can protect the companies like us, companies that can be able to grow, you understand, companies who have visions, you understand. There are a lot of companies who are small, but who are squeezed in the corner because they can't actually grow, you understand. So we need someone who can sustain, assure us that there will be growth in the future.
Most of South Africa's businesses rely upon the delivery of services like water and electricity from municipalities. They all want more efficiency in infrastructure to help them create wealth and jobs.
Corruption. Corruption is the main thing that paralyzes our government system, you understand. What I'm looking for someone who can be strong. First of all, who can look at what is in already and try to change it.
Another big issue for business is crime. Entrepreneur Alan Demby set up this gold coin business 40 years ago. In recent years, it has been plagued by crime.
Hurting, and I think the shopping centres and the malls and businesses generally are paying for the cost of crime. A number of your staff have been involved in criminal activity. So never mind the fraud, which is a small percentage, although it's probably all related, but serious crime, organised crime is not good, and it leaves a lasting, image with your staff. There was a picture a couple of weeks ago with all the big honchos of the Johannesburg City Council, and they were all walking with very nice suits and clothing, and there wasn't any litter in the whole street. The picture had been photoshopped to take out all the litter, and whenever I drive around the city, whether it's in the CBD or in the suburbs, there's litter everywhere. Clean up the litter, take the litter off the streets, keep the city clean, make everybody proud to be part of Johannesburg.
For someone like me, I'm coming from Cape Town, to compare with Joburg, you see there's a lot of trash cans which are not being used, and Joburg, there's always a rubbish around in the corner, you understand, the streets are not clean, the streets are not safe. Therefore now the people that are working in the factory have to work overtime. They're always afraid to walk out of the street because it's not safe. You don't find the visibility of the police. We need some police around, you understand, to see that it is safe to walk around.
It all adds up to hard times for South African entrepreneurs everywhere. So says Joan Warburton McBride of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Johannesburg, a body that represents 20,000 businesses.
It's not a secret. Business is struggling generally across the board because we know there's no growth in our economy. And I think we all have to get together seriously and drive that growth. There's no room anymore for us to sit in our corners and not work together. And something that I remember very clearly when I was in Denver some years ago, the president of the Chamber of Commerce and the mayor stood on the stage together, and they literally held hands and said, "We are joined at the hip. We bring business to the city together."
So all the issues taken into account, which party is likely to come out on top in these municipal elections? Aubrey Machiki, a research fellow at the Helen Suzman Foundation, has spent a lifetime embroiled in South African politics.
I'd say that the ruling party has had a difficult time over the last few years. How much of this is likely to be a protest vote, and how much of it is likely to be constructive voting for change?
Well, I think it is a bit of both. Because if you want to analyze what has happened in South Africa since 1994, you need to do three things. You need to accept that what has been achieved, particularly in developmental terms in such a short space of time, of 22 years, is unprecedented anywhere in the world. But you also need to accept that there have been deficits in the pace, scope, and quality of delivery since 1994. And then the third thing you must do is to accept that because of objective factors in the domestic and global environment, the post-apartheid state has not been able to deliver optimally. But what we tend to do, and for good reason, with good reason, is to focus on the second space, where we talk about delivery and democratic deficits. Because of this, the possibility is that many who are complaining about the gap between what was promised in 1994 and what has been delivered actually will do one of two things. In protest against the ANC, will either vote for another party, and for me there can only be two alternatives, the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters, or alternatively they will just stay at home.
What about the many other issues of this election? I mean, aside from the politics, a lot of business people and entrepreneurs are out there saying, look, our pipes are not being fixed, our streets are not being cleaned. We feel that whoever runs the city, whoever runs the cities of this country must work harder. How strong do you think that lobby is in this election?
They must take on board the concerns of business, particularly given the fact that our economy is anemic, and particularly given the possibility that the South African Reserve Bank is wrong in saying we're going to grow at 0%. In my view, we are going to grow at less than 0%. And therefore, you need the voice and cooperation of business and that class to work together with Labour and the ANC government to turn things around.
How likely is that?
Well, if you look at the work that the finance minister has been doing to try and stave off the possibility of a ratings downgrade to junk status, his attempt to unite Labour, to unite the state and big business behind a common vision for our economy, a seed has been planted there. One hopes that the seed will germinate into greater levels of cooperation between the state, Labour, and business. Because as it has been stated in the National Development Plan, if South Africa is to achieve levels of investment that are 25% of our GDP, that can only happen if Labour, business, and the state unite behind a common vision for our economy. So I think the finance minister has planted an important seed as far as uniting the key social partners is concerned.
And lastly, if the ruling ANC does do very badly in these elections, how likely is it that President Jacob Zuma could resign?
Well, we must distinguish between the approval rating of the president outside the ANC and his approval rating inside. Outside, his approval rating is low compared to his approval rating inside the party structures. I think inside the party, his position remains secure, but will not be as secure if the ANC does badly. And by that we mean if it loses, let's say, Tshwane and Johannesburg. And when we look at the national popular vote, it falls below 60%. In that case, his position will become less secure or more insecure. But I don't think it will be enough to force the ANC to recall him before its national conference in December next year. So the worst case for me, the worst case scenario for Jacob Zuma is that the ANC does badly, bleeds quite badly in this election, and as a result, ANC leaders feel insecure about the ANC's position in the 2019 and 22 elections, and so far, the majority, so badly that the majority of them believe that he must be recalled. I think the compromise position that will emerge in that scenario is that he can go as far as December 2017, and then the ANC elects a new president of the party, and after that, Jacob Zuma is allowed to announce his retirement at some point between December 2017 and the 2019 elections.
Whichever party runs the town halls of South Africa, it must never forget the people whose number is growing every day. The poor and destitute crammed into shacks on the fringes of the wealthy cities, like these in Alexandra on the doorstep of Sandton. Surely the first job of any new mayor is to give them jobs, homes and hope.